the mass picketing began outside Grunwick, which is a photo processing plant in North London, very close to where I lived, and it was a strike over struggle that led to a strike for union recognition within the plant. Stories will be in the film. But I belonged to a small filmmaking collective called the Newsreel Film Collective that was set up about a year beforehand, and we'd actually got a grant from the BFI to make films to support trade unionists in struggle. I document trade union history and act to make quick, fast newsreels that could be used to support and involve other trade unionists in providing support for the struggles that were going on at the time. So this became my local dispute, so I went to Newsreel and said, look, we should be down there on this July in when the call for the really mass picket, there's something extraordinary going on and we've got to document it. And we got about 3 or 4 crews together quite quickly, and we made a film covering the event of that day called Stand Together, which we finished in about 3 or 4 weeks. And then it was used by the strike committee, made to their editorial control ultimately. They saw it, they approved it, they liked it. It was 50 minutes long, and that went out around the country to keep the momentum going for further mass picketing actions, and in fact led on to the next famous day of mass support outside the factory, which is November the 7th, which that involved the SPG in a very brutal attack on the picket line, which was then by who was the Home Secretary at the time then? Merlin Rees, not Melvin Rees, and he, he wanted this thing closed down off the streets, an embarrassment to the Labour Party. So he called in the SPG to do their worst, and they did. Then a second film then came out of it, which is a very brief summary of what happened to the dispute, and that was made about within 6 months of as the dispute was ending, basically, called Look Back at Grunwick, and was looking at the general atmosphere of trade union recognition and what were the consequences of the Grunwick dispute. So that was the second film. And then, 30 years later, Brent Trans Council phoned me up and said, hi, have you still got that film? Yes, I have, just about, because the BFI lost the only other copy in their archive. And we showed it at a commemoration event at the Tricycle Theatre, which is in Brent, close to where the dispute took place. And then they said, well, we've got a little bit of money. Could you find most of the players or key players that took place and do the history for us? So that's what we're going to see tonight. We're going to see the history, which will incorporate the 2 previous films, Stand Together, that was shot on the day, July the 11th, 1977, the big mass day of support, and Look Back in Grunwick, the film that summarised the ending of the dispute. And so this is the official history that was made for Brent's Trades Council. Let's have a look at it, and then we'll just do questions and answers and things that arise afterwards. Is that all right? Let's go. Alone, we all have to do it together, and that's what, of course, Thatcher at the time set herself up as a sort of model employer. She was pissed off with management in this country for not being confrontational enough, and she said, I will show you how to be confrontational, I will do it with the state employers, and I'll show you how to do it. And they all kind of ran in behind her because, the only dividend payer she had was the voters every 4 years. And so, of course, all, the great anti-trade union legislation moved, and here we are today. So, yeah?
What role do you think the electricians' trade union played in fracturing the labour movement when it asked for pay differentials in the late 70s?
Well, Frank Chappell. Well, sure. We knew where he had come from and where he was going, and that was the House of Lords. Sure. I mean, we have. I mean, not unique. I mean, there's always been people who've been, who've identified with the establishment and the trade union movement. Nothing new about that, and they've always come amongst us and divided us, and they've always been celebrated by the media, and the ones that have had the ascendancy and the vote support in the elections. We all knew how, elections were controlled by the media when general secretaries and presidents were being voted for in that period, and the right wing got the ascendancy. The last thing they wanted was a radical trade union leadership, electing a radical general secretary of the TUC to actually properly coordinate trade union matters, so we could put on, there could be coordinated action. I remember one time when I was working for doing a film on the new technology and the impact on the workforce of the TUC, and was talking to someone there, and they said, oh, we're beavering away. what we're trying to do here is coordinate all the public sector workers' annual pay review days to be at the same time, so we can sort of do general strikes by stealth. Terrific, you know, and it takes us every time, you know, we've got to get all the union rule books to change so that we can get their annual pay review dates to be at the same time, and then we can just slowly all do the push at the same time. Who sabotaged that? The team. Who's saying, oh God, everybody doing their pay review in exactly the same week across the entire public sector? No, thank you. Let's go back to where we were. And yes, so they have always been frightened of their own power, in my view. You know, certainly their own coordinated power. And time again, when we've, you know, from the miners' despite the print workers' strike, how many mass disputes, when we all needed to do it together, they were busily making sure we didn't do it together. That there was old Albert Booth, a lefty, considered by the trade union. He's our man on the cabinet. You know, what was he saying? Getting on the phone to Len, kill them off, get them off the street. Don't want it. It's embarrassing us. And that's yes.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard a lot about sellouts. In fact, I've heard so much about sellouts in my life. I am sick to death of hearing the word sellout. And it does appear a lot, you know, a lot of left-wing parties come up with this all the time about sellouts. What I want to know is why did that lefty then, why was he selling us out then? What's the deal? Because I don't understand why everybody whinges and whines about sellouts all the time. Because they seem to have all, well, just in general. Why do you? I mean, you've just mentioned that guy, our man on the.
Albert Booth. He was considered by the trade union movement a good position. I mean, now we've got to talk about the relationship between the trade union movement and having a political party. And has it having a political party been its advantage or disadvantage, ultimately? I'm a syndicalist and say, actually, we can do it without a trade union, without a political party myself. If we've all got it, we've got the right coordination, the right movement, we all come together to apply the decisions that we want the whole movement, if weak supports strong, and vice versa, and we have a social policy as well as a political policy, we just, whoever's in power, doesn't matter. Tories, bloody Labour Party so-called, this is what we want, and we ain't working unless we get it. We will get what we want if we actually combined and united in that. But no, the Trade Union Bureau, our life is so much easier if we have a Labour government in power. Let's put all our money into making sure we have a Labour government. Well, the Labour government is pressurised by capital comes moving in, surging in, tells it what to do. And that's where its interests are always forged, and we're always playing catch-up. And therefore diverted, and in many ways trade unions' lives are much more easy. Let's go and talk to the Labour government, let's go and have sandwiches at 10 Downing Street. You know, we can whisper and, you know, into an MP's ear and all the rest of it. And the great tragedy for me is good people who work for the trade union movement think, oh, not getting anywhere, I'll go and be an MP. Well, in fact, it should be the other way round. Good MP, left-wing MP, should be coming and working for the trade union movement. In my view, you know, if we had all those lefty MPs, just imagine, Ken Livingstone, Tony Benn, Audrey Wise had all been general secretaries of major trade unions in the 1970s. We'd be in a different world now, wouldn't we? I mean, if they'd properly coordinated it as syndicalists and trade unionists. But we all go off to Parliament, it all goes wrong. Sorry, that's my view.
Yeah, I think Phil was really good and got over the level of frustration on the picket lines. I used to go to those pickets quite a lot, and particularly the hatred everybody felt towards Jackson, who was the leader of the Post Office Workers' Union, because the Cricklewood branch was really brilliant, and it would have just been so easy for them if they were supported by the Post Office executive to carry on their action. You know, because all the packages were coming in by post to that office, and they had to go from that office to the factory. So it was just simple. And they were just so shit scared of this new legislation. It hadn't even been tested in the courts. They could have pushed it, and what would have happened? If they'd sacked those post office workers, there would have been a massive. You saw how the miners came down. You know, it was there was massive support right across the country. People would have been up for it. They would have been defended, definitely.
I think absolutely. I completely agree with you. I mean, they were winning as soon as all it required was for support for the Cricklewood postman that was there, and for them not to be isolated. And there was if there was a mistake made, by the strike committee and the supporters was that the Cricklewood posters were dragged out to Conway Hall, it was where the killing took place, on about the end of July, just as the end of the 20 days of the boycott, the reimposition of the boycott. There was no post being moved. And Norman Stagg, Assistant General Secretary of the Postal Workers, was the assassin sent in by Tom Jackson. And we weren't outside the Conway Hall to cheer the blokes in, to give them support. They were left, they were isolated, and he just ripped into them and said, you'll be out of the union, you're going to bankrupt the union. And it was lost by 2 votes. Even that, you think, gosh, what heroes the post office workers were, to take that action and just stand by it, and and lose strike pay and all the rest of it, and be humiliated by their own union, and provide such solidarity. Absolutely exemplary behaviour.
I just say when I was thinking thing about the police was that when they had those mass pickets, I can remember when all the miners came down, and we just thought, this is it. This one day we're gonna stop that bus going in. And I couldn't believe it. I don't know whether I got this right, because I went to different ones and I got a bit confused. We were going to stop the bus, and they decided to march them all around bloody Willesden. And some of us stayed behind, and we got absolutely massacred by the SPG. They could have stopped it that day. And I just didn't, I don't know why they did that.
It was a terrible deal that was struck between when the TUC realised it couldn't stop the day of action, because the miners had initiated it and some engineers and all that, they were going to come. And there was nothing that Albert Booth and all his gang could do to stop them coming down. Then they moved into Plan B, which was to send the deputy down there, who was a guy called Norman Willis, who was then the deputy general secretary. Remember him, right? Or the man in the white suits, we used to call him. And he was there to and literally sang songs. Water the Workers' Beer was one of them, on the picket line, keep everybody happy, and then marched them all away, which was the agreement that the Apex had forced on the strike committee to accept that you have your 2 hours of the mass, and then we march them up the path.
Them all coming down.
Well, sure. I mean, I wouldn't quite say that. I mean, it was a heroic moment to have that many people on the street from all over the country.
Well, I don't know actually, because that killed the strike. I mean, I knew then that it was defeated. When they all marched away, and there was quite a lot of us stayed behind, we think this is it. We're defeated now. Because they could have, that day, that moment was words for me. I knew it, everyone knew it. They couldn't even stay to stop the bloody bus. There was all these miners, there were thousands and thousands of people there. There weren't that many police, we could have stopped them.
We could.
We tried.
Yeah, no, I mean,
a number of us tried at the end.
I mean, it's logistics, really, at the end of the day. How long could you keep a mass picket like that up?
Oh, on that one day, you could have done it.
It wouldn't break him on one day's strike.
It would have been symbolic.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean,
they hadn't got in that day.
The key thing was not moving his post. No post, no money, no business, and that's when you start talking. And that's what the Cricklewood postmen did. That's why they needed the support, and that's why they were broken by their own leadership, and that's why he was given a peerage and put in the House of Lords. Tom Jackson, as we know, that's where he ended up. So that was the arch crime, in my view, how those postmen were treated. Sorry.
Years ago, I saw Harold Macmillan, an ancient man, being interviewed on the television, and he was talking about his early years. And he said, we realised that the Labour Party, it was inevitable that the Labour Party would be in power. So we decided we had to make sure that the country would be in safe hands. Now, what I'm interested in, what did that mean? How did they go about emasculating the Labour Party and the workers' movement? That seems to me a key question which I've never ever found out the answer to.
I'll just take another point. I'll come back and I'll only give you my view on that.
It's probably a bit of a simplification, obviously. I guess my answer. Any organisation which has a hierarchy are certainly flux, basically. You vote for somebody, and once you vote for them, you've got no comeback.
Unless you're all I can say is read some of the accounts of the optimistic, enthusiastic, new left-wing MPs that have arrived at the House of Commons, about the experience, about the institution, about what it does to you. And in the end, the institution cripples you. I mean, once you submit to that institution, which is not of your making, it's of Harold Macmillan's making, it's of that establishment, then you abide by their rules. Then you start doing all this silly thing and standing up and speakers and, you know, all the rigmarole of how you speak in Parliament, and, you know, you can't call somebody a liar, and, you know, all the rest of it, and all this procedure, which completely poleaxes people. They don't know what to do. They're embarrassed. They're, you know, people laugh at them because they're seen as novices, you know, when they go around. Read the accounts of MPs when they go for the first time. I mean, it's just, it's, you know, it's a Dickensian gentleman's club, and they've got to subscribe to it. Well, that cripples you from the word go. What are you going to do? What's your politics going to do in that environment?
Well, that crippling is coming down into the trade union movement as well. I mean, I was at the picket line most of those 2 years, every single day, and I actually saw the agent provocateur getting out of the vans at 6 o'clock in the morning in the city clothes with the golf balls that they were hurling at the bus and hurling at the police. I saw it with my own eyes, and when it was all over, I saw them getting back into the police vans at the end of the day. Absolutely clear as daylight that that's what they were doing. But I do think that people, the higher up you get within those organisations, I think the more you have a duality of loyalty. And I think with the trade union movement, what they were really scared of doing was breaking the law. So the police weren't scared of breaking the law. They were making up the law as they went along. They didn't care about being violent and throwing bricks and bottles as well as golf balls. They didn't care about breaking the law because they knew they'd never be, the proof wouldn't be there because we didn't have mobile phones in those days. But I think the top of the trade union movement and the structures of the trade union movement are still absolutely terrified of breaking the law. And I think the link with the Labour Party is really important as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're uncomfortable. A lot of trade union leaders are uncomfortable with their own members.
I thought I remembered the water workers cutting off the water and the electricity workers cutting off the electricity
no, not at all,
at various points during that dispute.
No, there's only direct action was the post office as well. Sorry, no, you had to go.
I fully concur with what's just been said about the mainstream trade unions. Once you've got paid officials doing your business for you, you're in trouble, because those paid officials, like any worker would, are going to look after their own interests. And if they foresee strike action, wildcat action on any different level, then they're going to stand in the way of it. I mean, at the moment, thankfully, I'm in the IWW, which is run by members for the members, but I'm also, for me sins and my day job, in Unison, yeah? And we've just found out they've been, even though it's been passed at conference and democratic executives to affiliate to local cuts movements, it's come from Prentice, that centre, not to affiliate. The local branches are not allowed to affiliate to the anti-cuts alliance. So whilst they're grandstanding in speeches, taking substantive false pretences, their class cowardice is beneath my contempt, to be perfectly honest. I'm trying not to swear. But like, basically this has come trickling down through regional officers who come down to executives at Unison and tell the democratic structure that should be sovereign to our working movements what they can or can't do. And it's not only about protection of their own interests, it's, as you say as well, and I've heard also, about being dragged in front of the courts, but they haven't got the bottle to take it on. They don't have the bottle. And they just leave us. And that's something else. Most of the regional officers in this city live in fucking Nailsy and shipping sod. They don't live in our estates, they don't give them monkeys. I've also heard strongly as well that Labour Party is sitting on their hands for 5 years whilst we live in this shit, and then in 5 years' time they might stick their head above the parapet and go, well, we told you so, vote Labour. Tossers.
Excuse me there.
Yeah, I mean, you've referred several times to like Labour left MPs and like their fate, you know, the fact they became MPs and were corrupted by the system and should have gone instead and become like firebrand union leaders. But I think, you know, we saw there Jack Dromley, you know, Harriet Harman's old man. Yeah, she was a firebrand in the 70s as well. Not as an MP, but like with different campaigns. We can see that even the left-wingers who achieve positions of power ultimately just become part of the system. You know, someone like Livingstone, who you cited as a potential left-wing leader, you know, he achieved power as at the GLC twice, well, 3 times possibly now. You know, in 2000, when like non-trade unionists tried to organise independent May Day events, he threatened to arm the police against us.
Yeah.
You know, these people, they might be on the left for a little while, but as soon as they get a fraction of power, right, they are corrupted by it. We just cannot rely on them. No. I think, what's far more interesting, instead of people now on the left bleating about the TUC not holding a march against the cuts until next March, in fact, much more interesting is what's going to happen this Wednesday with things like the national campaign against fees and cuts that have ignored the NUS, ignored the trade union leadership, and are calling a day of action. And I think, in Bristol we could see a significant number of students and education staff come out, and that might be replicated around the country, and that is the sort of thing that is going to start terrifying the Lib Dem coalition, but also the trade union leadership, because they run the risk of losing control of the situation. And at the end of the day, the trade union leadership, as far as I'm concerned now, is just part of the system and part of the government.
Not to disagree with what other people have said about, association labour and kind of their interest being as paid officials, but the other thing, even if they're not associated with Labour, 6 to 8, in Paris, whatever, is that the left, because if their main driving force is power, they'd rather be in control of a failed Labour movement than not be in control of a successful Labour movement. So it's even more basic. It's the desire for power. So they'd rather sabotage their own side, I think.
Yeah, I think the point that's coming up here, I'll come back to my question before. Maybe it's not something you can answer, but I don't believe that these left-wing radicals, whatever, who get into trade unions or into the Labour Party, I don't believe that it's just purely that they're feathering their own nests. I don't believe that. It's I don't believe bankers are just feathering their own nests. I don't think it's as simple as that. I'm interested about the fact that the politics of, are we talking about the left wing of capitalism here? That's the question. Are we talking about the left wing of capitalism? Are we talking about a group of people who basically aren't revolutionaries but might claim to be? That when it comes to the crunch, that it's actually a systemic problem within the left itself, within the trade unions, within the Labour Party. As far as I understand, the Labour Party was formed because of syndicalists realised in South Wales in 1909 that they won a strike. I think it's famous. They won a strike on the railways. Beat the fucking scabs up and all that. Won, and then all that happened was the owner of the railway company went to Parliament. Went to his friends in the ruling class and took all their money off them through the law and crushed the union. That's why the Labour Party was formed, because syndicalists realised that they had to have. This was the way they went for it. They went for political power. They needed both economic and political power at the same time. And that's why the Labour Party's formed, and fair fucking play, because I think it was a sensible move at the time, for whatever reason. It was the sensible move. Now the question is the problem not individuals feathering their own nests, not individuals who are unreliable, sell out, boring. Right? That suggests to me that there's something else going on here. That in fact, the politics of a lot of what appear to be revolutionaries, arguably, is not actually that revolutionary. And in fact, we're talking about the left wing of capitalism, and that's why they can't actually pull it off. That there's an ideological thing going on here. Yeah. I don't know.
I think there is something going on, and I don't think it isn't about selling out and stuff like that particularly. Although obviously people who will talk left and sell out, it doesn't happen. But I think trade unions play a role as well in our society, which is about negotiations between capital and labour. And in times when there's not a big upsurge in resistance and not a big militancy, they often play the role of doing things, negotiating over wages, negotiating over conditions, doing casework and stuff like that, and they in many ways, to some extent, reflect the conditions of the time, and they play this role. And you see, I've been involved in unions for a long time, and you can see this, this process whereby, when there's not that much militancy and stuff, there's sometimes a closer relationship between management and the trade unions in the workplace, because they're trying to do this kind of balancing act all the time, and sometimes they get too close to management. And I think that goes for any trade union. I don't think it goes particularly with ideology. I think it goes for any trade union. you know, whether it's syndicalist or whether it's, you know, it's a traditional trade union, you know, it reflects what trade unions are about, you know. It's only when you have a real social militancy that you might have some revolutionary trade unionism come into play. But for most of the time, it plays that dual role, really, a negotiation between capital and labour.
Which is really important, because,
yes, it is important.
you know, having been chair of branches and union activist for donkey's years, I mean, we do save people's jobs, and we do stop victimisation, and we do stop bullying and, you know, unfair treatment, and we do manage to do an awful lot to make life, you know, better for the majority of people and stop them being picked off. So I think the trade unions do play a really important role, and I'm a great believer in them, but they're not really revolutionary, because it's about negotiating the status quo, really, to make sure it's a bit more fair, but it's not about changing the system at all.
That's right.
Sadly.
Can I just come back? I mean, I've been interested in the answers to the question, but I'm very unsatisfied with this idea that people are corrupted by getting into positions and so on. What you're suggesting is that anybody here who's elected to a position will then change sides. I mean, that's not conceivable. So it seems to me that there's more going on, and I think some of the other people, some of the people here have given more satisfactory answers.
The trade union is a complex beast, full of a whole variety of different types of people in there for different reasons. There are great, in my experience, there are paid officials who do great work on the rank and file, and they've often been victimised shop stewards who haven't been able to have a go, and thank goodness the trade unions have employed them, because that is what they've done by being good rank and file shop stewards. If they can't, for whatever reason, the struggle has been lost, they've been blacklisted, and we know that happens, and the trade union employs them to be good full-time trade. That is absolutely virtuous, and there's a lot in our movement. It owes a lot to people like that. No question about it. We want more people like that in the movement. There's no question about it. There's also a whole lot of other people, and I've put them on the right of the movement, who think in very sectarian terms about their union and their member. They see other unions as the enemy. They don't believe in uniting with them, and they all organise the union so that we will be divided rather than united. They're my enemy. That's, you know, as a syndicalist, because we won't get anywhere, because when push comes to shove, we need all our strength to take on capital when they are really pushing against us, and they're doing that right now. There's a great rollback against our conditions that we won, we're going to lose them. And we have a weak, enfeebled, divided trade union movement at the moment that isn't holding the line, and we feel very bad about that, okay? Now, about going to MPs, someone said about MPs and my view about MPs. I know really good, or 2 or 3 really good MPs, absolutely, Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell, I know them well. They're absolutely terrific, absolutely fight like tigers on the ground, a great constituency MPs, all the issues that I want raised when I need an MP to get someone talking, or a meeting, or someone to speak about it, they're there fighting for it. But they are an extreme minority, you know, within all the people that move in the Labour Party, that surge up to Parliament, and what happens to them, and the political processes of keeping your nose clean. Are you a careerist MP? What have you got to be a careerist MP? You don't rock the boat. You want to become a junior minister to get on the ladder, or you don't make waves in that situation. There's very few people who don't see it as a career path being an MP, and that's the corrupting process, in my view, right? What was the other point? Sorry.
I'm just saying that people are not automatons. It's not just you get in that position and automatically you're corrupted. I think there's more going on, and you've said some of it, I'm sure.
But surely the point is to learn from history. You know, the trade union movement has not learned from Grunwick. It hasn't learned from the miners' strike of '84. Didn't learn from the Wapping dispute, the Eddie Shah dispute in Warrington, where he took the first paper out of Fleet Street. You know, they just don't learn. And the same with left-wing MPs. You know, how many more left-wing MPs do we need before we understand that you cannot find a parliamentary road to socialism, or indeed to anything except capitalism? It's like, you know, how much history do people need to see before they realise that something just isn't working and we need to try something completely different? I'm fairly bored of like people coming up with all sorts of excuses for these people.
We've got to go back to basics and start selling the importance of trade unionism.
Yes.
Because young people aren't joining trade unions. You know, all the talks I have in schools is kind of trade, you know, absolutely zero knowledge about it. And it should be the automatic process that you go to when you go to work. You want to, well, who's the steward? You know, what do I join? You know, this is what's going to defend me. You know, some, whatever it's called, human relations or human resources, all that rubbish they talked about, going, they're going to solve your problem at work. They've got to be educated. They work for the company. They're not in your interest. And that's slated. So we've got to have a campaign to join. All this bloody money that trade unions give to the Labour Party, why don't we have big hoardings about what trade union could do? Why don't they open up their offices that are all over the place where people sit around bored out of their minds because they've got nothing to do, where people, the citizens' advice bureaus are closing down? Why aren't people just turning up to their local trade union? Oh, can you help me? This is happening to me. My rent's going up. I'm getting slung out. I'm losing housing benefits. There's people there that want to help, will help. Then they say, well, trade unions are doing something for me. Let's join it. Let's get involved. But do they have the imagination to do it? Of course they bloody don't. That's why we're not going anywhere. Sorry.
Yeah, go on, you speak first.
Why do you think people don't learn from history? That's a sort of a big question.
Wise.
Yeah, a bit wide. But yeah, I mean, is there something about the way in which history's explained to young people like myself, I suppose, that sort of cuts you off and doesn't like, for some reason it doesn't seem to be getting through the history of class struggles, I suppose.
Can I respond to that? Because I don't know, I just think, like, cynically, it's not in the interest of teachers, education system, the class. Like, I mean, they set the system up, it's not in their interest to teach us how to take it down.
I don't even teach English Revolution in curriculum.
Pardon?
I don't even teach the English Revolution in curriculum. Most important thing that happened in this country. Yeah. Sorry, Doc, sorry.
Yeah, no. Cheers to the comrade who was at Grunwick's, I believe.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So
yeah, my mother was pregnant with me at Grunwick's. I've grown up always hearing about it. So
she's always been hearing about it.
So I was really happy to get to see this because I don't know much about it. I grew up in Canada, and so I didn't. So I was quite happy. I'm a bit shocked my mother went after seeing how far the police were.
Apparently you were kicking though.
Yeah, exactly.
I just wanted to come back to where, I know this is boring history and all that, but it seems to me that what happened, the formation of the Labour Party, go beyond that, go backwards into time, into the 19th century. What you see is, you see like a big struggle in the 1830s for, like, you know, for electoral enfranchisement, right, and particularly by the working class in the 1830s. After that, you know, one of the historians in our group would argue, and I would agree with them, that actually the working class in Britain got a bit fucking bored with the idea of political power through some bourgeois parliament, and it spent most of the rest of the 19th century getting themselves organised, getting cooperatives, right, getting trade unions, getting organised, putting food on the table that's good, getting education and all that stuff. And they actually carried out a lot of self-activity themselves in that period between, say, 1840 and 1900. And it's only really when syndicalism rises at the end of the 19th century, then you get the Labour Party as a result of that strike. And we need to think about that process now. We need to think about that process. What is, as far as working class go in this country, you've got to start thinking about what is the direct requirements. Because I think the working class in the 19th century went not actually interested in, we don't actually want to vote for a load of bourgeois MPs anymore. They're not actually going to fight for our interests. And even if we get the odd person who's really supported from the middle class into Parliament, not really important. What's important is we put good food on the table, we get education, we get ourselves sorted out and organised in the factories where we work. And we need to think about that again now, because this is a time where we may have to say, well, maybe these forms are not the right forms anymore. Maybe the class isn't the industrial worker anymore, which I suspect it's not in this country for reasons. We need to start thinking about who the working class are, who that involves, the unwaged workers, the people, the unemployed. We need to think about new organisations that will represent those people and be able to articulate their struggles far better than the trade unions of the post-war generation. Slag me off.
I just think we've got to go where the energy is, and the energy is always with the youth. And, I can remember the Anti-Nazi League and the role of the trade unions in that, and that had energy and pace and certainly a mass following because it produced an energy and an excitement and it was their music. and the trade union movement is just, you know, it is ageist in reverse, you know, paradoxically. You know, it hasn't got the imagination to allow people to run with things, to put up certain money so young people can run projects, run their own initiatives, so they can get a bit of confidence of doing something on their own. I think that, you know, it's just overmanaged from the top. Everyone's worried that someone will write the wrong or do a rude poster, or, you know, something anarchic will go on, and oh God, we can't be associated with that. You know, and therefore it's sort of tightening in on possibilities when there's a huge lot of energy there. We saw what happened when the young people were marching the other day. They didn't mess around, did they? I mean, they clearly made an impact, and people are starting to think, you know, and all this sort of just marching passively along and waving to the tourists, you know, is not necessarily the only way things can be done. So that's the real tragedy, you know, for us in our movement. It's you know, a lot of old people hanging on to jobs inevitably that are very cautious in their mindset and haven't got the imagination to draw in young people, which is what we want. If we don't refresh ourselves, we will die. Simple as that. I'm finished.
Can I just say a triple thank you to Chris for a wonderful, very powerful film. But secondly, for initiating a very interesting, stimulating discussion, and thirdly, for proving that, you know, there is a tendency, I think, on the left to think the media and write the media off. I think Chris has proved with the organisations he's worked with more recently, with Team, that it is possible, and Indie Media is here to prove it as well, that it is possible to have media used for our side as well. Thanks very much, Chris.